For the second year, I had the privilege, the honor of being the keynote speaker for Harriet Tubman House, AME Zion, I should just say. They have in the Northeast District a pilgrimage the first Saturday in June every year, where they gather to reflect, to remember, to fellowship, and to thank God for the life and liberating legacy and love of the amazing Harriet Tubman. The more I learn about her, the deeper my appreciation for her sacrificial love grows. Of course, all of us in school, we've come to know the Harriet of the Underground Railroad. But the AME Zions do a phenomenal job of teaching us of the post-enslavement Harriet. Harriet Tubman lived 50 years after the Emancipation Proclamation. And the question becomes, what did she do during those 50 years? And so at the Harriet Tubman House, we've come to discover, and here's the beautiful thing, right there in that small town, Harriet Tubman's fingerprints are literally everywhere as people take advantage of her legacy for their own economic benefit. But the AME Zion Church was the church that Harriet Tubman was a member of. And as a consequence, she literally left her property, her home, to the AME Zion Church. She and her husband helped to build the local church there, and we were able to see that. And again, it's amazing that a century plus later, it still stands. And then to go to her home, we did that after the service, which was an experience I still don't have words to convey how powerful it was. But let me quickly get to the home. I'll come back to the service. To go on the property of someone who owned it in excess of 30 acres of land. 30 acres of land. Just stop and think about that for a moment. Not 1 acre, not even 10, but 30 acres of land. Not a block, 30 acres of land. And on this land, she grew vegetables, she grew fruit on this land. She had pigs, cows, and so she had a self-sustaining economy going, so that the word is that when black people came to town, those who were poor came to town, they knew they could get both housing and food from Harriet Tubman. This is post-enslavement. This is after the Emancipation Proclamation. Harriet Tubman built a two-story home on this 30-plus acres of land. And the home burned to the ground, but she rebuilt it with bricks that were basically leftover bricks. And yet it's a home now, 2 stories, that is comprised of leftover bricks. And that's the home that she lived in. And so you're talking about ingenuity with leftovers. You're talking about taking what is left and making something new. And again, I'm talking about a century plus later, this home still stands. 2-acre home built by Harriet Tubman with leftover bricks. And then down the way, there is what Chris Norman brilliantly calls senior housing. She built senior housing, and she named it after John Brown. Of course, you know the story of John Brown, who led the raid at Harper's Ferry, fighting to free the enslaved. And Harriet was invited to be a part of that raid. She wanted to be a part of the raid. Providentially, she was sick, because you know what happened during the raid. John Brown was captured, and eventually he was hung. And Harriet would have been hung if she had been there, but she was sick, and so she couldn't make it to the raid. But getting back to the fact that she named this home for the aged because she was also a nurse. Harriet Tubman was a nurse. And as a nurse, she believed that health care was a right. So no one came to that home for the aged, that senior housing, and had to pay. She took care of them. She took care of their physical needs. And again, they had a very nice home to live in because Harriet Tubman had that kind of vision. So every time I walk on that property, I think of about a woman who was what, 5 feet tall. The word they use is illiterate, but you don't have to be literate to be wise, to be intelligent. And so my clap back is, okay, she's illiterate, but she's intelligent, because it takes a lot of intelligence to own 30+ acres of land, to accumulate 30+ acres of land, and then be such a generous spirit that everyone knows if they come to that part of New York, get in contact with Harriet Tubman and you're going to be all right. And I guess another piece I need to say is that we have to start giving props to her when it comes to the whole women's suffrage movement, women getting the right to vote, and the part that she played, because she recognized that that was still an injustice. It wasn't enough to be released from slavery. She recognized that here you have women in the country, you know, white, black, whatever, who could not vote, who did not have the right to vote. And so her influence, her power was used, and she used that power in order to set the stage for the women's suffrage movement and the eventual first-class citizenship of women in this country. Again, that's Harriet Tubman, 5 feet, illiterate, but intelligent and empowered and inspiring. And so that day, we went to the property afterwards, and again, to see the property is just majestic. The last piece I'll say is that whenever I have the privilege to speak, they have the rally slash worship slash memorial slash service in this school auditorium there in the city. And I always prepare inspired by her memory. I literally read everything about her leading up to that occasion, because the theme they've assigned me for the last 2 years has to do with the ongoing struggle for freedom, it's really the unstoppable quest for freedom. And I just love that, because that's straight out of Harriet Tubman's spirit, unstoppable in her quest for freedom. And so that's been my theme for the last 2 years. And I focused on her relentless drive for freedom, for justice. And I'll just put it like this. Harriet Tubman, for me, she's my shero. If this country was right, she'd be on Mount Rushmore as one of those presidents never elected to the highest office in the land. But what she did, given what she had to overcome, where she came from, and what she became, leading, as it were, having what? The strength, the wisdom, the power, the resilience to literally lead the life of what? One who was enslaved, but who never acquiesced to slavery or assented to slavery and enslavement, and then escaped to freedom and had the wisdom to go back and get others so they could escape to freedom. And when you think about it, you know, she did that during the winter. She didn't have a portable heater, she didn't have a car, and she would do it during the winter because wisdom said, okay, nights will be longer. and they traveled under the cover of darkness. Didn't have GPS, but she followed the North Star. So there was that life. Then there was the life during the Civil War, where she was both a nurse and a spy. And then she became known as General Tubman by many who were a part of the Union Army because of the raid she led on that river in South Carolina that resulted in 750 enslaved people being set free. That's a part of her life. And then post-enslavement settles in, what, Upper New York. And there in Upper New York, she creates a life where she literally was a very integral part of her church, the AME Zion Church, helped to build that church. And then, oh, I forgot to tell you this. One of the saddest things that this country has to repent for, among so many others, is the fact that Harriet Tubman served in the Union Army, but they never gave her a pension. She did not receive a pension until her husband died. And that's when they decided to give her pension. So she lived, according to our tour guide, she lived most of her life from day to day. She never was rich, but she did own that land, and she was an entrepreneur, but she used what she was blessed with to be a blessing to others. As a matter of fact, William Seward, who just loved and respected her, became a very powerful person, politician, and one day saw Harriet, gave her some money, I think it was $5, a lot of money back then, and he lamented to someone who was, talking to him about Harriet Tubman. He said, I just gave her $5, but what's really sad is she would not use a dime of it on herself, and it's probably gone by now. That's how big her spirit was and how deep her faith was. And that is, she knew, okay, maybe I won't have it tomorrow. The same God who gave it to me today is going to give it to me tomorrow. So when I tell you, Harriet Tubman, and going every year, and now what? Next year I'm going back for the third time. And it's a pilgrimage that stirs my spirit. It makes me want and inspires me to fight even more for justice. Because if that 5-foot woman who didn't have the benefit of an education could do all she did, I know I can do a whole lot more. May you be inspired afresh by the life, legacy, and liberating love of that woman called Moses, General Harriet Tubman.